Chapter 2. Something Could Happen to You. We came to Brooklyn in 1961 in search of medical care for my youngest brother, Raymond, whose toes were nearly severed by a bicycle chain when he was 4. In Puerto Rico, doctors wanted to amputate the often red and swollen foot because it wouldn't heal. In New York, Mommy hoped doctors could save it. The day we arrived, a hot, humid afternoon had splintered into thunderstorms as the last rays of the sun dipped into the rest of the United States. I was 13 and superstitious enough to believe thunder and lightning held significance beyond the meteorological. I stored the sights and sounds of that dreary night into memory, as if their meaning would someday be revealed in a flash of insight to transform my life forever. When the insight came, nothing changed, for it wasn't the weather in Brooklyn that was important, but the fact that I was there to notice it. One hand tightly grasped by Mommy, the other by 6 year old Edna. We squeezed and pushed our way through the crowd of travelers. 5 year old Raymond clung to Mommy's other hand, his unbalanced gait drawing sympathetic smiles from people who moved aside to let us walk ahead of them. At the end of the tunnel waited Tata, Mommy's mother, in black lace and high heels, a pronged rhinestone pin on her left shoulder. When she hugged me, the pin pricked my cheek, pierced subtle flower-shaped indentations that I rubbed rhythmically as our taxi hurtled through drenched streets banked by high, angular buildings. New York was darker than I expected, and in spite of the cleansing rain, dirtier. Used to the sensual curves of rural Puerto Rico, my eyes had to adjust to the regular, aggressive, two-dimensionality of Brooklyn. Raindrops pounded the hard streets, captured the dim silver glow of street lamps, bounced against sidewalks in glistening sparks, then disappeared like tiny ephemeral jewels into the darkness. Mommy and Tata teased that I was delusioned because the streets were not paved with gold. But I had no such vision of New York. I was disappointed by the darkness and fixed my hopes on the promise of light deep within the sparkling raindrops. 2 days later, I leaned against the wall of our apartment building on McKibben Street, wondering where New York ended and the rest of the world began. It was hard to tell. There was no horizon in Brooklyn. Everywhere I looked, my eyes met a vertical maze of gray and brown, straight-edged buildings with sharp corners and deep shadows. Every few blocks, there was a cement playground surrounded by chain-link fence, and in between, weedy lots mounded with garbage and rusting cars. A girl came out of the building next door, a jump rope in her hand. She appraised me shyly. I pretended to ignore her. She stepped on the rope, stretched the ends overhead as if to measure their length, and then began to skip, slowly, grunting each time she came down on the sidewalk. Swish, splat, grunt, swish. She turned her back to me. Swish, splat, grunt, swish. She faced me again and smiled. I smiled back, and she hopped over. ¿Tú eres hispana? She asked as she whirled the rope in lacy arcs. No, I'm Puerto Rican. Same thing, Puerto Rican, Hispanic. That's what we are here. She skipped a tight curl, a tight circle, stopped abruptly, and shoved the rope in my direction. Want a turn? Sure. I hopped on one leg, then the other. So if you're Puerto Rican, they call you Hispanic? Yeah, anybody who speaks Spanish. I jumped the circle as she had done, but faster. You mean if you speak Spanish, you're Hispanic? Well, yeah. No. I mean, your parents have to be Puerto Rican or Cuban or something. I whirled the robe to the right, then to the left, like a boxer. Okay, your parents are Cuban, let's say, and you're born here, but you don't speak Spanish. Are you Hispanic? She bit her lower lip. I guess so, she finally said. It has to do with being from a Spanish country. I mean, you or your parents. Like, even if you don't speak Spanish, you're Hispanic, you know? She looked at me uncertainly. I nodded and returned her robe. But I didn't know. I'd always been Puerto Rican, and it hadn't occurred to me that in Brooklyn, I'd be someone else. Later, I asked, are we Hispanics, Mommy? Yeah, because we speak Spanish. But a girl said you don't have to speak the language to be Hispanic. She scrunched her eyes. What girl? Where did you meet a girl? Outside. She lives in the next building. Who said you could go out to the sidewalk? This isn't Puerto Rico. Algo te puede suceder. Something could happen to you was a variety of dangers outside the locked doors of our apartment. I could be mugged. I could be dragged into any of the dark, abandoned buildings on the way to or from school, or be raped and murdered. I could be accosted by gang members into whose turf I strayed. I could be seduced by men who preyed on unchaperoned girls too willing to talk to strangers. I listened to Mommy's lecture with downcast eyes and the necessary respectful expression of humility. But inside, I quaked. 2 days in New York, and I'd already become someone else. It wasn't hard to imagine that greater dangers lay ahead. Our apartment on McKibben Street was more substantial than any of our houses in Puerto Rico. Its marble staircase, plaster walls, and tiled floors were bound to the earth, unlike the wood and zinc rooms on stilts where I'd grown up. Chubby angels with bare buttocks danced around plaster wreaths on the ceiling. There was a bathtub in the kitchen with hot and cold running water, and a toilet inside a closet with a sink and a medicine chest. An alley between our bedroom window and the wall of the next building was so narrow that I stretched over to touch the bricks and left my mark on the greasy soot that covered them. Above, a sliver of sky forced vague yellow light into the ground below, filled with empty detergent boxes, tattered clothes, unpaired shoes, bottles, broken glass. Mommy had to go look for work, so Edna, Raymond, and I went downstairs to stay with Tata in her apartment. When we knocked on her door, she was just waking up. I sat at the small table near the cooking counter to read the newspapers that Don Julio, Tata's boyfriend, had brought the night before. Edna and Raymond stood in the middle of the room and stared at the small television on a low table. Tata switched it on, fiddled with the knobs and the antenna until the horizontal lines disappeared and black and white cartoon characters chased each other across the flat landscape. The kids sank on the floor, cross-legged, their eyes on the screen. Against the wall, under the window, Tata's brother, Tio Chico, slept with his back to us. Every so often, a snore woke him, but he chewed his drool, mumbled, slept again. While Tata went to wash up in the hall bathroom, I tuned into the television. A dot bounced over the words of a song being performed by a train dancing along tracks. with dogs, cats, cows, and horses dangling from its windows and caboose. I was hypnotized by the dotting, skipping over words that looked like nothing like they sounded. She'll be coming run, demutin, when she comes. Toot, toot, sang the locomotive, and the ball dipped and rose over. She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes, with no toots. The animals, dressed in cowboy hats, overalls, and bandanas, waved pickaxes and shovels in the air. The tutu was replaced by the bow wow or a meow ow or a moo moo. It was joyous and silly and made Edna and Raymond laugh. But it was hard for me to enjoy it as I focused on the words whizzing by, on the dots jumping rhythmically from one syllable to the next, with barely enough time to connect the letters to the sounds, with the added distraction of an occasional neigh, bark, or kid's giggle. When Tata returned from the bathroom, she made coffee on the two-burner hot plate. Fragrant steam soon filled the small room, and as she strained the grounds through a well-worn flannel filter, the Ochiko rose as if the aroma were an alarm louder and more insistent than the singing animals on the television screen. The clanking of pots against the hot plate and counter, the screech of the chair legs as I positioned myself so that I could watch both Tata and the cartoons. Well, look who we have here, the Ochiko said as he stretched until his long, bony fingers scraped the ceiling. He wore the same clothes as on the day before, a faded pair of dark pants and a short-sleeved undershirt, both wrinkled and giving off a pungent, sweaty smell. He stepped over Edna and Raymond, who barely moved to let him through. In two long-legged strides, he slipped out of the bathroom. As he shut the door, the walls closed in, as if his lanky body added dimension to the cramped room. Tata hummed the cartoon music. Her big hands reached for a bang, poured milk, stirred briskly as if heated, and frothed. I was mesmerized by her grace, by how she held her head, by the disheveled ash-colored curls that framed her high cheekbones. She looked up with mischievous caramel eyes and grinned without breaking her rhythm. The Ochiko returned showered and shaved, wearing a clean shirt and pants as wrinkled as the ones he'd taken off. He dropped the dirty clothes in a corner near Tata's bed and made up his cot. Tata handed me a cup of sweetened café con leche, and with a head gesture indicated that I should vacate the chair for Tio Chico. No, no, that's okay, he said. I'll sit here. He perched on the edge of the cot, elbows on knees, his fingers wrapped around the mug Tata gave him. Steam rose from the inside his hands in a transparent spiral. Tata served Edna and Raymond, then sat with her coffee in one hand and a cigarette in the other, talking softly to Tio Chico, who also lit up. I brought my face to the steaming coffee to avoid the mentholated smoke that curled from their corner of the room to ours, settling like a soft gray blanket that melted into our clothes and hair. I couldn't speak English, so the school counselor put me in a class for students who'd score low on intelligence tests, who were behavior problems, who were marking time until their 16th birthday when they could drop out. The teacher, a pretty black woman, only a few years older than her students, pointed to a seat in the middle of the room. I didn't dare look anyone in the eyes. Grunts and mutters followed me, and although I had no idea what they meant, they didn't sound friendly. The desk surface was elaborately carved. There were many names, some followed by an apostrophe and a year. Several carefully rendered obscenities meant nothing to me, but I appreciated the workmanship of the shadowed letters, the fastidious edges around the F and the K. I guessed the girl had written the cursive message, whose is were dotted with hearts and daisies. Below it, several lines of timid chicken scratch writing alternated with an aggressive line of block letters. I pressed my hands together under the desk to subdue their shaking, studied the straight lines and ragged curves chiseled into the desktop by those who had sat there before me. Eyes on the marred surface, I focused on the teacher's voice, on the unfamiliar waves of sound that crested over my head. I wanted to float up and out of that classroom, away from the hostile air that filled every corner of it, every crevice. But the more I tried to disappear, the more present I felt, until exhausted, I gave in, floated with the words, certain that if I didn't, I would drown in them. On gym days, girls had to wear grass green, cotton, short sleeve, bloomer leg, one piece outfits that buttoned down the front to an elastic waistband, covered with a sash too short to tie into anything but a bulky knot. Grass green didn't look good on anyone, least of all adolescent girls whose faces broke out in red pimples. The gym suit had elastic around the bottom to prevent the sight of panties when we fell or sat. On those of us with skinny legs, the elastic wasn't snug enough, so the bloomers hung limply to our knees, where they flapped until we ran. Where they flapped when we ran. The uniform being one piece made it impossible to go to the bathroom in the 3 minutes between classes. Instead of wearing it all day, we could bring it to school and change before gym. But no one did, since boys periodically raided the locker room to see our underwear. With the gym suit on, proper hygiene during the course was difficult, as we needed at least 3 hands. So most girls brought notes from their mothers. The problem was that if you didn't wear the uniform on gym days, everyone knew you were menstruating. One girl brought 2 gym suits, chopped off the bottom of one, seamed around the selvage, and wore the top part under her blouse so that no one could tell if she had her period or not. I asked Mommy to do that for me, but she said we didn't have money to waste on such foolishness. Friday morning, we had assembly. The first thing we did was press our right hands to our breasts and sing the Star-Spangled Banner. We were encouraged to sing as loudly as we could, and within a couple of weeks, I had learned the entire song by heart. Oh, say, can you by the dong sulilay, waso brawa we held at dead while lilas gleaming, whose broad stripes and by stars through the perro los hay. O'er the ramparts we wash, was so gallantry streaming. I had no idea what the song said or meant, and no one bothered to teach me. It was one of those things I was supposed to know, and like the daily recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance, it had to be done with enthusiasm, or teachers gave out demerits. The pledge was printed in ornate letters on a poster under the flag in every room, the Star-Spangled Banner. However, remained a mystery for years. Its nonsense words, the only song I could sing in English from beginning to end. On a chill October afternoon, Mommy, Don Julio, and I went to the airport to pick up the rest of my sisters and brothers, who'd stay in Puerto Rico with our father until mommy could afford their plane fare. Delsa, Norma, Hector, and Alicia were smaller than I remembered them, darker, more foreign. They huddled close to one another, holding hands. Their eyes darted from corner to corner of the enormous terminal, to the hundreds of people waving, hugging, kissing, to the luggage that banged into them. Bird-like, they lifted their heads, mouths open, towards the magnified, disembodied voices bleating orders from the ceilings. I wondered if I had looked that frightened and vulnerable only 2 months earlier. We'd moved to a new, larger apartment on Barrett Street. Tata and Tio Chico had been cooking all morning, and as we entered the apartment, the fragrance of roasting achiote, garlic, and oregano, the family milling around, laughing and talking, made it like Christmas. We had many relatives in Brooklyn. Paco, Tio Chico's son, who was short and muscular. His arms and face were always bruised, his eyes swollen and bloodshot, his nose bandaged, the result of his work as a wrestler. His professional name was El Santo. In the ring, he wore white tights and boots, a white leather belt, a white mask, a milky satin cape with a stand-up collar studded with rhinestones. He was one of the good guys, but although he usually won his fights, he always received a beating from the guys in black. Paco's brother, Jalisco, worked in a factory. He was tall and lean like his father and groomed his mustache into a black, straight fuzz over his lips, like Jorge Negrete, the Mexican singer and movie star. Whenever Jalisco came over, I circled him like a febrile butterfly, offering drinks or food or reminding him he'd promised to sing Cielito Lindo after supper. Mommy never left me alone with him. Tata's two sisters lived within a few blocks of our apartment. Tia Chia and her daughters, Margot, Guri, and La Muda, were close to my mother. They came dragging bags full of clothes and shoes they no longer wore. Guri, the youngest, was slender and soft-spoken. Her clothes fit me, although Mommy said that the straight skirts and sheer blouses and high heels Guri favored were not appropriate for a girl my age. Her sister, La Muda, was deaf and mute. According to Mommy, La Muda had been born with perfect hearing, but as a toddler she got sick, and when she recovered, she was deaf. That's why, then why don't they call her La Sorda? I began. Mommy warned I was disrespectful. La Muda read lips. If we spoke with our faces away from her, she shook our shoulders and made us repeat what we said until her eyes focused on our mouths. We quickly learned to interpret her language, a dance of gestures and hands with hums, gurgles, and grunts that didn't seem to come from her throat, but from a deeper source inside her belly. Her hands were large and well manicured, bedecked with numerous gold and stone rings that shimmered as her fingers flew here and there. La Muda liked us to read the paper to her. That is, Mommy or Don Julio read it out loud, while we kids acted out the news. La Muda's eyes darted from Mommy's lips to our portrayals of that day's murders, car crashes, and results at the track, enacted race by race around the kitchen table. Her laugh, frequent and contagious, was deep but flat, as if, unable to hear herself laugh, she couldn't get the tone. Her boyfriend was someone we'd known in Puerto Rico. He was a thin, laconic, dark-haired man who dressed in a beige suit. When we first met him, my 6 sisters and brothers and I were afraid of him. But he took a deck of cards from his pocket, performed some tricks, and after that, we called him Luigi, which sounded like the perfect name for a magician. Tata's other sister, Titi Ana, had two daughters who were closer to my age than La Muda, Margot or Guri. Alma was a year older, and Corazon a year younger. They spoke English to each other, and when they talked to us or to their mother, their Spanish was halting and accented. Mommy said that they were Americanized. The way she pronounced the word Americanized, it sounded like a terrible thing to be avoided at all costs. Another algo to be added to the list of some things outside our door. When they walked into the apartment, my sisters and brother submitted to hugs and kisses from people who were strangers to them, but who introduced themselves as cousin this or auntie that. Delsa was on the verge of tears. Norma held on to Alicia as if afraid they get lost in the confusion. Hector circulated among the men, followed by Raymond, who chattered about Paco's exploits in the ring or about Don Julio's generosity with pocket change. Luigi, his usually solemn face lit by the hint of a smile, performed new tricks, and the kids relaxed somewhat as if this reminder of our life in Puerto Rico were enough to dissolve their fears. Margot had brought a portable record player and records, which played full blast in the kitchen, while in the front rooms the television was tuned to the afternoon horror movies. The kids shuffled from room to room in a daze, overdosed on the Twinkies, Yodels, and potato chips Don Julio had brought for us. The welcome party lasted into the night. Don Julio and Jalisco went to the bodega several times for more beer, and Tio Chico found the liquor store and came back with jugs of gallo wine. Mommy ran from the adults to the kids, reminding the men that there were children in the house, that they should stop drinking. One by one, the relatives left, and the kids once more surrendered to hugs and kisses. Our pockets jingled with pennies that the aunts, uncles, and cousins had handed out as if to pay for the party. Luigi escorted La Muda from the apartment, his pale fingers pressed against her waist. His too big suit flapped around his scarecrow frame. As they walked out, the adults exchanged mysterious smiles. Tio Chico and his sons were the last to leave. Tata and Don Julio went into her room and drew the curtains that separated their part of the apartment from ours. "It's time for bed," Mommy reminded us. We got ready. Delsa and I on the top bunk, Norma and Alicia on the bottom. Hector on the sofa, Raymond in the upholstered chair, pushed together. Edna and Mommy in the double bed. She turned out the lights, and the soft rustles of my sisters and brothers settling into their first night in Brooklyn filled with a secret joy, which I never admitted, but which soothed and treasured me and reassured me in a way nothing had since we left Puerto Rico.